Hello, Vaughn. I'm not sure if you're unmuted.
Sorry.
No problem. There we go.
Did you get over your stomach bug thing?
Yeah, that was a really nasty thing to deal with in the middle of a busy week, but for most parts, I think I'm all recovered.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining. And I really wanted to do this podcast because I think the last time that we were on the meetup, it was really just a general talk, and I don't think everyone got a really good idea of your background and how you got into all of this. We talked a little bit in brief, but I think
Mhm.
having an hour with you with a focus on where you gathered your experience and your knowledge and how you came to share it with everyone and how you ended up building products on top of all that to help people. I don't think that was a complete story, and so I
Mhm.
think an hour of having you kind of tell it all would be really interesting. I think for many inspirational, at least for me and others. And then if we have some time, 10, 15 minutes at the end, when there is something from the audience, we can take that. And of course, we're also on YouTube. If someone types in some questions, we can address those. But we want to keep it short and focused on you, not be distracted by people that have questions. There's plenty of opportunity at other meetups, your workshops, of course, and many other places where people can get a lot of your time to answer specifics. So
Yeah.
I'll do my
Sure.
best to moderate. And if there's a couple of other people that are regulars, they'll also help to moderate. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Thank you again for joining and taking the time. It was supposed to be Wednesday. It is a Friday. Hopefully, you've also had a chance to rest. I know you finished a whole bunch of workshops, or are you still in the middle of them? I think you're
No,
finally over the hump.
yeah, uh, well, yeah, I finished last week, but this week has been really draining as well. I've got some high priority things and, of course, necessary interruptions working on Vlingo. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then let's get to it then and get started. So let's rewind back to the really early years of where you grew up. Where do you call your hometown now?
Yeah.
Seriously, I think it's important for people to know, like where
Okay.
people were there. We don't have to spend a half hour on it, but
Sure.
maybe 5 minutes into where you grew up, how you got into computers and the industry, and all those things that kind of I don't know, set up your career for and the trajectory you took.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so boy, I was born in Columbus, Ohio. So if you ever uh, see me tweeting about Ohio State football, you can probably understand. And
Right.
actually, I haven't lived in Ohio since I was 12. Um, my father is a retired engineer, and part of my childhood was following my parents,
Hmm.
to other places. So I actually grew up in Kentucky from 12 on. And where are we going with this? So, yeah, I love Ohio State football, but I learned to love Kentucky basketball. So it was like Kentucky wasn't great at football. I don't think they've ever really been very good at football, but they're really excellent at basketball, but not this year. Um,
Right.
but anyway, point being, yeah, so all these things, they have some fusion on your overall life. And so I think, what was kind of very influential to me is that my dad being an engineer um, and a land surveyor, so he was into the civil side of engineering. Um, I would go out to work with my dad. Um, and there's even a saying that I was probably 4 or 5 years old and I was out on a job with my dad. And a guy said, "You're pretty young to be doing this." And my dad says that I said to him, "Heck, I've been doing this since I was 2." So So I kind of have this like technical bent, and I wanted to be an engineer like my dad. And so the plan was kind of like, um, University of Kentucky has a really good engineering program, or at least they did at the time. And strange enough, though, I got this call after I graduated high school, and it was a recruiter from a school that featured software development. Well, back then it was called programming, right? And
Yep.
and so they invited me to go to their school, and I think it was more like a certificate program, not a. Or I don't even remember what the institute was, frankly. Or I remember it was the Bell and Howell Institute, but I don't remember. And if you've never heard of Bell and Howell, they used to make computers. Maybe they still do, but probably don't hear about them much.
No.
Anyway, I didn't go to that school, but it kind of got things turning in my head about, they're telling me that my aptitude is really good for this kind of thing. And I don't know if that was just a line or but I believed it, right? So I started looking at universities and whatever, and so I got to this point where I had attended, a good friend of mine got me a pass to follow him around in his classes at a university, just so I could sort of, see what he was into. And to me, it just seemed like more of high school. I don't know
Right.
how to put it, and it was just so ridiculously, seemed to me, a waste of time. And so I just started looking for more of a fast track to get into software development. So I ended up going to a technical school that was accelerated, but it was totally focused on programming. And then, of course, back in the day, the economy, when this was happening, the economy was very stagnant. It was about the time that Reagan got elected the first time, and I was pretty
a lot
young,
of recessions going on. And
I didn't, I'm not really into that thing, but I do know it was very hard to get a job in that time because I had no experience, and everybody wants 5 or 10 years experience. And I'm so happy actually that I couldn't get a job then, because I probably would have been working in COBOL in New York City. And, like all the interviews, everything was in the financial district, Wall Street area.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy I didn't end up doing it, because I hated COBOL in school. I was really attracted to Fortran actually. And so you can probably see why, learning the C programming language for me was like an automatic. It's just like this, not the same as Fortran, but kind of like this, very narrow language. And as long as I could remember to put curly braces around control structures rather than just indenting, didn't work. So anyway, that's how I got into programming.
I don't think people realize just how few companies could afford to have programmers as staff, right? It was a very exclusive kind of thing, just the Moore's Law and all that. It was not something you could get your hands on, right? Home computers weren't around. I guess most listeners probably are too young to remember pre-internet days, some of them.
Oh, I started programming for a living. I actually got paid to program starting in 1983. Which wasn't so bad, given that I finally finished school. I think it was in 82. So it only took me about a year. But the way I got the job was a friend of mine worked as the custodian in the building,
right.
Where this, that's a nice way to say the other thing. But he, and he told me about this company that today we would call it a startup. Back then, it wasn't called a startup. It was just this company that was hiring people, And he told me about them, and so I went there and I begged for a job. I literally did, and I met with the VP. We didn't have CTOs, and It was like you were the president of a company, and then there was a VP of engineering and a director of engineering kind of thing, which we kind of have today. But anyway, both the VP, these were all EDS guys. They had been in the armed forces, US armed forces of some kind. So they all had this military background, which means they fit into EDS really well. And they all wore these Brooks Brothers suits with, starched white shirts. And so, I went in there to interview, and they both said to me, like, we have no idea why we're going to hire you, but I think, we're going to give you a chance. And I was like, whoa. And they seriously underpaid me, and but I just wanted a job. I wanted
the experience was key. Right. That's what it still happens today, right? People are willing to work for shares and a pittance just to get some experience.
Yeah. So even that company was they were time sharing on Boeing computer systems. The airplane company, right, used to have timeshare, and so my first day at work there was going to a COBOL programming, and probably flow charts and data flow diagrams and whatever kinds of things. And so that was in Boeing Computer Services building in New York City, and I'm just like, no idea what's going on. All these experienced, COBOL, CICS, what is it, 3270 terminal and 370 IBM 370 mainframes and tapes and all that. I mean, I had used all that stuff, but it was still just sort of like, so many mind-blowing things. Anyway, so I went through that, and then they ended up not immediately using me as a COBOL programmer. Yay. Like one of the best things that never happened to you. And so what I started doing is I started this skunkworks thing in IBM ROM Basic, right? It was free. Mm-hmm. And I would save my programs to a disk, and all you had to do, you could literally boot up, like if you didn't put a diskette in the boot drive of the IBM PC, it booted into BASIC, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it was this perfect, like, free programming environment for me. Mm-hmm. And so I implemented this inventory system for totally on my own. Nobody even knew I was doing it until one day, right? My manager walked in and she's like, "What are you doing?" Like, and this was months in, because I was doing all my other work, and everything that I was supposed to do. But, when I got a chance, I would code on this inventory system, and it really worked. Anyway, it's just too broad a topic to go into why I was even working on an inventory system, but it was useful for the job I was doing. Right. So anyway, she sees this and she's like, and I figured, oh man, I'm going to get in trouble, And the next thing I knew, she was like, "We got to get you on the programming team, because what had happened is they were not only using IBM 370 mainframes, but the code itself that was shipped to clients, and the reason that I need inventory is because we had this sort of turnkey IBM PC system with 10 diskettes that had 10 different parts of a COBOL program that ran on the IBM PC with Microsoft COBOL, right? And they were like, "Man, this whole thing on the PC is just so messed up," because they're putting, there were these little tabs that you put over the floppy drive indent thingy.
I remember. Copyright, copy protected, or whatever, write protected. Yeah.
So those things in a human environment would fall off over time, and then they'd start using program disks for data disks by accident, and it was okay, yeah. So go and insert, the program pauses, says remove disk 2 from drive A and insert disk 5 into drive A, and close the door, and then hit any key, and then the program would keep going. And so anyway, about that time, right, there was the super ultra famous Byte magazine cover C programming language, right? And I read this article, and I was like, dude, we got to do this. The whole thing was about tiny code. Like C was such this minimal language. And so, we had this whole opportunity, what I call it, to rewrite everything in C. And again, it was like this thing. I go to the VP of engineering and I said, Bill, we got to rewrite this whole thing in C. And he's like, well, what are you talking about? Like, what is C? And so I explained it, and I explained how it was going to, be, like we could probably fit the entire program on one diskette.
Yeah.
And we can even add functionality, right? And I was correct. We actually took those 10 diskettes, and in the end, we had an executable, an EXE, running on DOS, right? IBM or Microsoft DOS. And it, I think it was like 100 kilobytes or something, the whole EXE, which was just amazing. And it had more functionality. It was a nicer user interface. Everything was better about it. And
Yeah.
But again, they took a chance on me. They were like, "Who's like this? Look at how much we're paying this kid." And
Yeah.
and somehow they allowed me to team up with a few other people, and we tried it. And
Yeah.
and they didn't fire us, like right away or anything.
You
So,
got
and then I
some
started
time
building a
there, yeah.
team. Yeah, as we saw progress, we built a team, and I don't even remember how long it was, maybe 6-9 months or something to the actually delivering
Mhm.
something, and it worked, and it was just amazing.
Yeah, just a side
And
note for people, before the internet, to really learn how to program, it wasn't an easy thing. You really had to go out of your way, because home computers were not a thing. So you couldn't type into YouTube tutorial on C and learn how to do it. And I remember being frustrated with the best programming books always being checked out at the local library, and really doing trial and error stuff. So, when people would lend a hand, and they had someone at a computer store that was on Usenet and all the other things or whatever, they, as a small kid, they would give me a disk. Oh, this kid is interested. They'd give me a disk with a disassembler on it or something, because I wanted to learn that. And so, you were really at the mercy of the kindness of strangers back then. to
yeah,
take you under the wing and help you out somehow, and just the infrastructure for learning was not
yeah.
there.
Well, being in New York City, I had about a 45-minute to an hour ride on the subway to get back and forth to my apartment and into Manhattan. Right, I lived in Queens, and they. So I found this book. It was Peter Norton's, like Inside the IBM PC or something like that.
Hmm.
And I think he actually used BASIC in that book. I can't remember, maybe it was Pascal, but it was something enough that I could understand. And that's where I actually learned the most about, like writing to screen memory on the IBM PC. If you're on a CGA, how to prevent
Right.
flicker, and all this stuff. And, it was, and how to program the keyboard, interrupt 21 versus interrupt
Yeah.
1610, maybe was the keyboard. I think
Yeah.
16 was yeah, anyway, and I'm
Yeah.
talking hex, right? So,
Yeah. Well, the interrupts were an important part of learning how to
oh yeah,
properly
yeah,
program, right?
yeah. And it just, I went from like knowing zero about programming in, really like useful programming in general, to like getting hired as a contractor 2 years later for, I don't know, at least 3 times the amount that this company was underpaying me.
Yeah.
And so boom, like that, right? And it was just like, from then on, I've never even blinked. It's just like amazing, all these opportunities, and you can just keep learning and learning. And so, yeah, that's what it was.
So fast forward to when you got into what we should dare call modern programming, where we all learned the pitfalls of some of the higher level patterns of object-oriented programming, and how this really started to get into domain-driven design and Cqrs and event sourcing and event storming in your case as well. So, where does all that lead up actually start to? For me, it was a pivotal moment in my career. There was a hump I had to get over to get into that way of thinking, and so maybe where did that come in into your career, and what led up? Like, what's the previous couple of years that led up to that?
So I did a couple years of contract work, and I made really good money. We were able to buy a house after a couple years in contracting, which was a pretty huge thing. I only had like 3-4 years experience, and so and everything was good. I was having fun, but I just sort of like, I've always had this bent on my mother's side of the family. My grandfather was an entrepreneur, and so besides the technical influence from my dad's side, my grandfather really gave me that kind of entrepreneurial spirit in my head and my heart, I guess, too. And so I just wanted to start my own company, which was, I was going to work in cottage industry, creating programmers tools for C libraries, right? Like basically C libraries that did special things. And that was a big thing at the time. Like, you made serious money, doing that. And it wasn't just about the money, but it was, about the freedom and doing what you want to do and like being able to express your ideas. So I did that, and that was successful. And somewhere along the way, I started like getting into small talk. And there was a point where I actually had the opportunity to work on a very significant, small talk based application that ran on IBM PCs. But actually, this was using Digitalk's small talk on OS2. And the cool thing is that I had actually written a book. I was a co-author on an advanced C programmer's guide for Microsoft Press on OS2. Well, if you know any history about OS2, you know that, like IBM and Microsoft were like this, except underneath they were always like this, and fighting and stuff. But at some point, Microsoft just said, boom, we're out, we're breaking our partnership with IBM. We are not working further on OS2. They can take whatever they want from that. We're going with Windows, right? And that was around Windows 2. I think Windows 3 hadn't quite.
Because OS2 was quite good, right? And they went with the licensing and the compatibility route, and Windows was just a program running on top of everything, right?
OS2
not really
was
an OS,
far superior than
like
Windows.
The Sony Beta versus VHS, right? Same kind of thing, right?
Exactly. But OS2 didn't survive. Well, I had written this book, co-authored this book, and the breakup happened right as we were finishing the book. And so the book never got published. The book was for Microsoft Press. This to me is one of those other, sort of like groundbreaking opportunities where I was going to be like really set up well by writing this book. And it never happened. So, well, it got sold actually, strangely enough, to Addison Wesley, who is my publisher now. And I now have a signature series. So, well, what's that? So this happened way back there, but they never published it because, OS2 never really got through that adoption point. But it was an excellent operating system, and presentation manager was way better than Windows. The API was way better. It was a much more powerful system, but Microsoft, whatever, they just won,
they took that backwards compatibility route. They didn't want to drop anything for people authoring things. They took that route through that saw money in contracts as the number one thing. But the innovation certainly was on OS2's side, especially that it was a real operating system, not just a program for running on top of DOS.
So anyway, that's so we were using Smalltalk on OS2, and it was Digitalk's Smalltalk VPM, right? The Smalltalk V was, I don't even know what the V was. It virtual? Was it very good? I don't know, whatever the V stood for back then, but that's what we used. So I got experience in Smalltalk. And then, I had used sort of a little bit of Smalltalkish things in C++ before that. The NIH, the National Institutes of Health in the US, had this C++ library that was supposed to mimic the collections of, the Smalltalk collection hierarchy. And anyway, I had, used some of that, but, when I finally got into Smalltalk, that is just a mind-blowing experience, because first of all, you look at the syntax compared to C, anything, that you've ever done before, like C programming, it's totally different. And so you're just like, you get this headache just trying to read the code until you realize how simple it is, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's your brain trying to tell you this is way harder than anything I've ever done.
Yeah.
No, it's actually way simpler than anything that you've ever done.
We get that switch sometimes, people getting into functional programming from traditional C# or whatever, Java. Yeah.
So anyway, so I learned Smalltalk, and that was the kind of start of really understanding model view controller. And actually, Smalltalk V, Digitalk Smalltalk, had what was called, I don't know, presentation something or whatever. So they actually cut out the controller part, right?
Okay.
It was just, I can't remember the exact name, but it was like you went from the view directly to the domain model, and you had this little part in, I think it was in the view code itself, that sort of was like the little translator between the model that the controller didn't have to do. And well, that's what I'm doing today with Lingo, right? It's just it's just trying to reach that ultra simplicity of getting rid of all the layers that you can possibly dispose of, right? And so anyway, so it's just, those things have had a big influence on my life and my, my career. And I was working with teams at the time where conversation, right, communication was so important, because we were working on brand new core domain kinds of things, right? That we were doing things that no one had ever done before. And so the conversations literally led to a ubiquitous language that was codified, into domain models and our user interface. It was completely everywhere. And we would spend hours and hours trying to figure out how to name something correctly. And I would say that the bounded context wasn't there, but it was kind of there because we tended to develop smaller kinds of tools or applications that would then integrate together. And it happened, but it's not like we had bounded context, or
it wasn't formalized, but you had some organization to bite things off in chunks that were manageable, not dump things into one giant pot. Yeah,
exactly. And in Smalltalk, we totally used events, right? That's how the view learned about what happened in the model. They were events. Right. So, okay, like, there's not a wire there, but there doesn't have to be a wire to use domain events, so it's just, so when I first read Eric's book, it was just like, this is incredible. This is what I was doing all along. And now that I'm not doing this anymore, because I'm now out of that environment and working as a contractor again, and just being forced to do all these ridiculous things with software.
You just go and do what they ask you to.
It's like, you want to get a job, you need to pay bills, okay, you're going to do EJB now, right? That's if you weren't doing EJB for probably about 3-4 years, you couldn't get a job, literally. I mean, or you could get a job, but it was pretty not interesting. All the startups in the Boulder, Colorado area were using J2EE at the time. And there was just nothing else. And I think .NET was getting in there, but .NET was probably 3-4 years after J2EE. And frankly, when I heard about the .NET effort, I had a friend who was really, I had been very pro Microsoft, um, but then I heard that they were saying, oh, no, all you need is a view and the database, right?
Right.
Everything should be a stored procedure. And I was like,
Oh,
I'm
right.
running as far away from that as I possibly can. Well, .NET ended up changing, but that's when they mostly just had ASP, right? I
Yes.
think it was ASP and Microsoft SQL Server. And this friend and colleague of mine, is trying to convince me that this is the way to go. And I was like, look, EJB is stupid, but it's not that stupid, right? I mean, there was degrees of stupid happening in the, late 90s, early 2000s, but
Definitely.
that was the ultimate stupid. And
Um,
wow, now I
well, there's
go
some
around.
reasons for that, though, right? I think there's
Yeah.
some disillusion with kind of the heaviness of the N tier. Like, it wasn't just about 3 tiers anymore. You got into these ridiculous abstractions and needless frameworks in between. At some point, there's some complications, and people said, well, you can just, rely on data alone. And so the DBAs went, sure, awesome, absolutely. Everything's a stored procedure. Now you have no IDE. It's all just editing text for a stored procedure, but it's at the database, so it's fast. What a great trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that still continued to work for a while until processors and disks caught up. And
Mm-hmm.
that sort of scam was over pretty quickly.
Yeah, it was just it was sort of an unbelievable period of time. And then actually spring arrived. And I have to say, spring was just that. It was a really breath of fresh air, at the time, because J2EE really needed to be overthrown. It was just a ridiculous time. And the thing is, they never really, after all those failures, they just kept trying and trying to make EJB work in various ways, to the point where,
Yeah.
you're working on now like the WebLogic server, and you see an exception. And what do you see in the exception stack trace? Spring, right?
Yeah.
They're using Spring framework underneath to create the next, JEE. They dropped the 2, right? And
Yep.
now it's just JEE. And you're seeing this stuff, and it's like, wow, they're even using Spring and they still can't get it right,
Yeah. Well, I guess it was the same kind of effort on the Microsoft side, right? To get out of the old days of OLE and those kind of DLLs and get into .NET. That needed to happen as well. It was a real mess. If anyone recalls, on the Microsoft side, just a different kind of mess, but a mess nevertheless. And the .NET was a breath of fresh air because it made Com Plus what it was supposed to be, right?
Yeah, and all that, at the time, I remember, like mid 90s, I went to this big splash announcement of Microsoft, oh, we're taking on the internet, and it was ActiveX. ActiveX was the big message, and I'm still not quite sure that I fully understood that, but I think all it was just COM, underneath, right? And they put something wrapper around it so that it was more web-ish or something.
Those objects wrapped around the framework plugins, kind of your base classes for everything you were programming in MFC, I guess it was back then mostly, and things like that. So yeah, horrible days. Don't want to really repeat those.
I booted MFC every day.
Yeah.
Don't forget to turn off your machine, because you're going to waste a lot of energy if you don't, right? It's like those days. So yeah, I had to boot, Visual Studio, Visual C++ is what it was. Yeah.
I remember. Yep. Yeah. Still have some of those books on the shelf somewhere gathering dust behind me. But
man, do we have to keep going through this pain?
No, we can stop showing how old we are now, and we can move into the future and jump into exciting stuff like event storming, event sourcing, domain-driven design. Well, we already touched on domain-driven design because you touched on Eric Evans' seminal book on the subject, and then so let's take a deep breath and get into the future and present, at least, and just talk about your idea behind, what stood out most from domain-driven design. And then following on that, obviously, event sourcing, event storming, and Cqrs, and organizing solutions in a way that allows businesses to really make the solutions be hand in glove with the business?
Yeah. Well, I have to say that my first, official exposure to event sourcing and CQRS was through Greg and Udi, right? So everybody
Right.
knows that.
Yeah.
But again, there was familiarity with things that I had done, and not CQRS. I can't. I don't think we ever really had that sort of very clear model separation. It was always using the more, what I would say, traditional domain model where your queries went against that model.
Right.
But I saw the beauty of event sourcing and CQRS immediately, but to me, it just seemed like everybody was bandwagoning at the time, right? Isn't that what's called the what is that in the
Dunning-Kruger?
No. It's
adoption phase.
The early adopters, right?
Yeah,
early adopters. Yeah. It was like,
but my other curve is still applicable.
Well, I was. The thing is, I had enough experience to know that when I saw this groundswell around it, and I'm really not that conservative, but I just said, there are going to be a lot of companies who regret letting their people call this shot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like, I wouldn't say that the regret happened then, but I think we all have seen over the past few years that there was this sort of trough of disillusionment, right? That and I think we're climbing out of that, which is important. But this is where the Dunning-Kruger comes in, right? The people who say, oh, we're going to do event sourcing and we're going to do CQRS, or they just say we're going to do CQRS and that means event sourcing, right? It's just like they don't even know.
But there was other problems with that adoption, because the bandwagon jumping and the new hot buzzword, it meant that people thought that, well, I don't need to really worry about data management or security or other things. Mm-hmm. The silver bullet mentality, I think, is best described by thinking that it's going to do things it's not meant to do as well. Mm-hmm. And so it's just all applicable. And it's not just the hype part. That's a simplistic way of looking at it. I think people then drag in that, oh, these other things get done magically for you. And you still need to worry about your disk space and all those things.
Yeah. And Udi was actually not into event sourcing. He would, he was all about CQRS, but, and I never really learned exactly how he handled he used events, but he didn't use event sourcing.
That's right.
But anyway, the point is, now Udi teaches event sourcing, right?
Yeah, I know.
So that's right. This is interesting to watch over time.
Pioneers versus settlers, right? You can also call it that.
Yeah. And so I was conservative around those things. And I openly said, I will use event sourcing and CQRS when they make sense, right? Mm-hmm. And at the time, I just didn't have this. Although, in reality, without the name, I was using event sourcing. I mean, because I was collecting events on medical machines,
right,
and sending those into an aggregate on the server side, right? And we were using Spring, so there was no JDE heavy stuff in there. So, like, I was doing all that stuff, but I didn't call it event sourcing. And
exactly. I think Greg also talks about that event sourcing is not new at all. It's always been done about record retention, immutable storage, which is really reliable and gives you key advantages in a lot of domains, in a lot of areas.
Yeah, and the most disappointing thing to me was after collecting all this data, about medical treatments that are important to people's lives and health, they just ended up at some point just throwing it away, like drop the table or whatever it was. And, oh, we just have too much of this. We don't know what to do with it. I was like, are you serious? Look at before we had the word big data, look at all the analytics you could do with this stuff. And they're just like not interested in it. I think it was all about, figuring out how to bill Medicare and Medicaid effectively.
Right,
That was,
right. Oh,
that was
it's
their core domain,
I think
unfortunately.
that's always public versus private
Yeah.
sectors. You're going to have the abusers of that and people trying to make money off these things, which is a sad thing. But as we learn more, we can fight back with responsible design.
Yeah. So there we are. I mean, but for me personally, right? Um, I do. I tend to not necessarily attract the people who want to use event sourcing, or at least they do now, right? But
Hmm.
initially, when I was a DDD guy, now officially, even though having done a lot of very similar things before that,
Hmm.
people talked to me about DDD. They didn't talk to me about, oh, we want to do event sourcing in Cqrs. They talked to
Right.
Greg and Udi about those things, and everyone that I taught was usually afraid of those things, or they would say, there's no way our company is going to, permit their state to be shotgunned all over the place, right? It's just how they viewed it. And
Right.
so anyway, now I talk about event sourcing in CQRS all the time, and I teach it and I write books about it, and not just that, but I include it.
Hmm.
It's an important part of the solution.
Yeah. And then communicating these solutions and collaborating on these solutions, you obviously dove into event storming with Alberto, and his initial
Mm-hmm.
blog post about it from 2013, I believe, is when
Yeah,
the first time
yeah,
he mentioned it on his blog. What a
yeah.
great way to collaborate together, right?
Yeah, so I did this crazy thing, the Idd Tour, and I did it because actually some guys in Belgium. Okay, I went to Colombia, South America for a couple conferences down there, and I taught a couple of workshops down there while I was there, and I tweeted about them, and then these people in Europe started saying, "Come to Hungary, come to Belgium, come to
Right.
Poland, come to Germany, come to whatever,"
Yeah.
and I was like, this seems interesting. And so we put together this thing called the IDD Tour, which was connected with the launch of the Red Book. And
Right.
man, it was just amazing to. I mean, we made prices like really, really low, right? I mean, the other
Just get
workshops at
people
the
in seats.
time,
Yeah.
yeah,
Make it accessible. Yeah.
but I wanted people to learn DDD,
Yeah.
right? I, and I got a lot of criticism about that. But now there are conferences about DDD, right?
Right.
So, and the people who run those conferences were at my workshops, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
at the very first ones in IDD Tour. So, I'm sorry, but I don't apologize for that. I
Yeah.
actually
You
had
don't need
an
to. Yeah.
incredibly good idea, and I wanted to open up the whole world of software developers to DDD because I think it's important and I think they should learn it. And so I did that. I just simply did it. And we survived, whatever, 5 weeks of pretty intense stuff, and,
Yeah.
buildings in Europe that didn't have air conditioning, and, and learning, like getting taken by the hotels that we, like people are going to say like, oh, you can go to Poland and you can have the least expensive little mini conference or workshop, big workshop mini conference there.
Yeah.
Poland, Krakow, right? It was
Yeah.
like I mean, we got so overcharged for that. It was just incredible. Like we hardly made enough
Oh,
money
I'm
to
so
even
sorry.
go.
That's my hometown. I
Yeah,
apologize
no,
for
it's not
that.
your fault. It's just like, I don't know, we were trying to treat people well. I mean, we had like this 4-course meal in the hotel there every day for lunch, and I
Yeah.
think, I don't know if we paid for their breakfast too or whatever. But anyway, the
Yeah.
point was, um, that was my thing. I wanted people to learn DDD, right?
Yeah.
Of course, you got to make money,
Hmm.
and but we really didn't. Like, I made that whole year of starting with that, I made far, far less training with, in DDD than I ever did as a consultant, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Consultant. So it was just, this was a labor of love.
It
And
always is. People don't realize that. They think high flying conference goers are these millionaires. It's like, no.
no.
I can attest for Greg and others as well. It's
yeah. So anyway, and that's how my whole DDD thing started. I that my first book gets published finally after I'd written the book 20 years or more before, right? And now my first actual published book arrives, and the Idd Tour, and then we were like, then Nicole and I spoke, and she was like, we can't keep doing this. We actually have to find a way to make money at this, and otherwise we can't do it. And so that was that. So yeah.
I mean, we have virtual things now, so it's a little bit easier. But I certainly, I did a small little tour, so I know your your travel pains, but definitely not 5 weeks. Haven't done a 5-week one yet. But that should be fun. I should do it at one point.
It was a lot of fun, actually. It was fun. I mean, the thing is, right? I invited Alberto to join me in Belgium. I think Alberto, if you took all the European companies, at least, or countries from that time forward, I think he's probably more popular in Belgium than he is in Italy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have no doubt. People loved Alberto, right? And when he demonstrated for the very first time in public event storming in my tour workshop in Leuven, Belgium, people's mind, they were just like, "Whoa, this is so cool!" And so that we know what happened from there.
Yeah. Plus, is super charismatic and incredibly talented, as well as a talented artist. That's why drawing pictures and all that, and it's something that I love about him is that he has this creative side to him, which I think is so important in engineering that people overlook. And so he's been, and of course, being personable just helps run those types of collaborative workshops and be able to lead them. So definitely changed how we do those things in person with one another, for sure. So from event storming, when you started to do event storming, you started to look at this gluing, I guess, the business side with the technical side, making sure people are talking about the same, using the same language, ubiquitous language, and they're starting to be able to collaborate together and not work as the way that it used to, at least in my perspective, throwing things over a wall and waiting until the smart guys on the other side would give you something back to really that. How does that lead into V-Lingo and everything that you're doing today? That last part of
it. Lingo, by the way, we've made a decision. Our messaging isn't out there yet, but just for what it's worth, Lingo is now the company name. Xoom, XOOM, is the name of the product, right? So the platform. Great. So we're separating those two things because actually we have other products that we're working on. So Xoom as a platform, as an ecosystem, came about because actually, I had learned about the actor model before my book even was published. Right. And I was very interested in it, and I started working on an actor model for Java. And I was just playing around and experimenting and stuff. And I don't think I actually ever put the Java stuff out on open source. But what happened is the book and the tour and all this stuff just preempted that work. And it was like, okay, I have to tell you, first of all, when you spend time writing a book, and if you write books at the pace that I write books, that's because you're either working all night long or you're working all day long and all night long, right?
Yeah.
Which means you don't make money. So
I know the feeling.
Right. So I had a point in time there that I had some pretty dry, more than a year, but not 2 years, right? And so because I'm putting all this energy into this stuff, and it was sort of like, okay, on the family side of things and even the business side of things, like, okay, Vaughn, it's time to go, like you did this now go out there and you got to make some money for the family, right? So that's when I just said, okay, I talked to Nicole and she's like, well, why don't you drop the actor model thing? And here's this ACA thing that you've looked into, and
Right.
maybe just jump into that and see if they can, be amiable to the whole DDD thing. And when I first talked to Jonas, he was like, no, we don't have any efforts around DDD, but we should look into it, kind of thing. That was, I don't even remember. It was probably 2011, 2012, somewhere like that. And I just, I took Nicole's advice and I said, okay, let me try this out. Well, I think I had some influence there, but not the level that I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And without going into a lot of details, my disappointment just led me to say, okay, now I have time to do this the way I know it should be done. And this is why Vlingo and now Zoom, the new name, exists, right? So, maybe people still want to use those other tools and stuff, whatever. I'm just doing a completely different thing, right? And it is reactive. It is message driven. It is event driven and whatever, but we're doing something different in that you do not have to like totally throw away everything that you've learned in Java or C# over the years and just say like, okay, now I got to turn my brain upside down to do this new stuff. No, you don't. Actually, you get a whole lot of mileage out of what you learn, and right, think about those old Smalltalk days where I said they got rid of the controller, right? In Did You Talk Smalltalk? I got rid of the controller. Well, it's there, but literally the only code literally that you have to write is your domain model, because we have auto dispatch from REST, right? You want to call it an endpoint, whatever. We call it, resource handlers. But because actually that's what we're exchanging, right, is resources. So why not use the names, right? DDD naming, right? So use the names. It's a resource. Okay, represent state transfer. Okay, and so they're resources, and so we have auto dispatchers from REST requests to the domain model and automatic responses based on the domain model outcome, right? That one command that you're using. And also, if you receive events or commands or whatever through messaging, any kind of message that you receive through a topic exchange, whatever you want to call it, from a messaging mechanism, we auto dispatch those to the domain model. So now, like, don't bother me with all those extraneous architectural things that everybody wants to do those things, but frankly, when you do them once, twice, I'm telling you, by the third time, it's just like, why do I have to keep doing this?
That's exactly right.
And it's like so complex to track down where things go wrong, and just like get that stuff out of the way.
Exactly.
Let the platform or the ecosystem take care of that part of the architecture for you, and focus on the business stuff. Make great domain models, right? That's or at least good domain models.
But I'm not sure if you share this point of view, but I think it's I at least found that when you're talking about quote unquote new concepts like event sourcing or Cqrs or domain driven design and all of these things, people think they're going to have to learn to program from scratch almost, and they don't realize that they're still going to be typing the same type of code. You're still going to have to put HTML on that web page. You're still going to have to write to some sort of a data store. 80% of it is still the same. All you're doing here is getting a hand in organizing it. So, things like Zoom and Vlingo, as long as they have this ability to gently lift away all those boring parts without really changing the way that you talk about your domain language, et cetera, and really start to influence your business, well, that's pretty bad, then you're good, right? I don't know if you share that At least that's my
Totally.
learnings when I look at all this.
That's what it's all about. But I do have to say, you're going to have to get used to not writing getters and setters.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
I
We can
mean,
agree on
if you're
that.
doing Java, just please get used to not using getters and setters. And I just tweeted about, Spring has this world famous pet clinic thing out there. And it's just, to me, it's like, I would be embarrassed to put that as my sort of like flagship example. I have to say, it's
Yeah.
just horrible. It's a horrible example. And so I sat down with one of our developers the other day and we talked about, just very briefly, how could we turn this into an actual domain model,
Hmm.
and we did. And it took like an hour to do that. And I
Yeah.
drew it up. He's now working on the code, right, for actually implementing the pet
Hmm.
clinic. But yeah, just go look at that. And that is quintessential what you do not want to do, right?
Yeah.
That is like, just don't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, what's funny is they have this thing called a model, but it's not the model at all. It's abstract base types
Right.
that are used by the things that are actually model, but they're not in the model. They are in the endpoints, right?
That's
And it's
right.
just like, no, please stop spreading those messages, because unfortunately they have the power to influence millions of developers how to do it wrong,
I
you
know.
know?
Yeah.
And it's just so sad to me.
Yeah.
And I know they hate me, but I don't care. It gives me more strength because I know I'm doing the right thing,
Yeah,
And
you're saving
so,
people from a lot of pain down the road, right? There's a lot of these,
anyway,
what,
yeah,
yeah, this stuff that sounds so good on the surface and has these, I call it demoware, right? Where people
yeah,
see something exciting at a conference and the excited CTO comes back to the company. Everyone, stop what you're doing. We're doing this now.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've been promised great, great rewards using this new tool. So yeah, it's really interesting. What quick question about Vlingo and Zoom?
Mhm.
Any kind of inspiration for the names?
um, well, it's weird. I was trying to come up with a name, but I knew that the name had to have lingo in it because of
Right.
ubiquitous language, right? Lingo. And
Yeah.
it's a fun word, even
Yep.
though we may not think of the ubiquitous language as being lingo, because it's really not lingo, but it is a word that refers to language, right?
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
set of language, and it's a fun word because it
Hmm.
has an I and it has an O, right?
Yep.
It
It's
sounds
fun
like
to say.
Italian or Spanish or something,
Yeah.
and all those words are fun.
Yeah.
And then I threw V in front of it because I couldn't think of another thing, honestly, and
Right.
it's just the initial for my name, V. So
It
it's
works.
not
It could
really,
be virtual too, right? It's
yeah, it's
awesome.
not really an egotistical thing. It was literally just I kept searching and searching and searching for a name, and then and then and I just couldn't come up with something. But then I just said, "Oh, what about V in front of lingo?" And the .io was available, so I I just
Jumped on it.
boom
Yeah.
like that, and I just said I got to move on. Right,
Yeah.
this part of the naming thing shouldn't be that important.
Right.
And then someone pointed out later, it was like, or actually, I learned later. I don't know why Google didn't show me that there was actually a company named Vlingo before that got acquired. So the name is no longer used,
Oh, good.
but
Yeah.
there was a company that got acquired. It totally unrelated to
Yeah.
anything I'm doing, but I discovered that later. But anyway,
I have the same problem, but it's yeah. I think it's
well, yeah,
not an issue. I
Adaptech.
would have heard
I
about
do.
it.
I am old enough to remember Adaptech. They were backup
Yeah,
systems,
that's
right?
right. That's right. That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah, there was a
yeah,
tech, but there was a more current one as well.
yeah.
But yes, the original one. People still ask me, "Is that company, Adam?" No,
Yeah, Adam, did
no,
you
it's
do
not.
that, man? You should be retired by now. Yeah,
Yeah, what happened?
yeah,
Bad acquisition. Anyway,
yeah.
so we have about 3 minutes left. Is there, I tried to look for some, I think we really touched on everything that people were talking about. I was glancing at the chat as we were talking, but I think we covered all of those things. Anything you'd like to leave on in terms of where people can find out what's going on with Zoom, the next steps? I know that there's a .NET version that's out now. So now it's full Java, full .NET.
We're
Anything
nearing
else you'd like
parity.
to say about where people can learn about it? Obviously, We can find you. People can find you on Twitter very
Yeah.
easily, I'm sure. And anything to do with domain-driven design, I'm sure you pop up in the top 3 links in Google. But anything else you'd like to kind of leave people with to, what are the next steps to get a hold of you, get your training, try out Zoom, as it's now properly called, and look for the other products you're working on at vLingo?
Well, we've had sort of this unexpected identity crisis, especially with Vlingo, because people have told us, they're like, what does this thing actually do? Okay, it sounds interesting. It looks like you got all these parts, but what does it do? And
let's see a demo.
No, but I mean, what does it do in terms of explaining to them what it does in one sentence or a few sentences? So that's what we're working on right now, is improving our messaging, improving our messaging as in, like product messaging.
To explain what it is in the simple.
Explain what it is. And so that's going to get straightened out. But, I think what we've said now is actually consider potentially Zoom is a low-code solution, because actually, right, I mean, we literally can generate this entire bounded context project for you. And most of all the, architectural decisions are already handled for you. Doesn't mean you can't change the code or whatever. It's just that you start off way ahead of where you would otherwise. But then you really just need to focus on the domain model. So from that standpoint, it's low code. It's not low code in that we take over and you can't do anything that you really want to do. And this is only for corporate developers who don't really know how to program, or whatever kind of mentality. That's not what it is at all. But just go to vlingo.io. We have really inexpensive developer support available right now. I will tell you that's not going to last. Again, it's just Vaughn not making money, right? This is just how I go about starting to do things. Is I first do them because I want to and I want to help people, and then later we have to try to figure out how we're going to make money. So that we can,
it's literally pennies a day, right? As far I
it's
saw
$1.
some of
It's $1. Yeah, so it's 108
like that.
pennies
Really,
a day.
So that's really great. And what is your next event that your people can see you at? Is there a conference or another set of workshops that you're going to be starting?
Well, I am speaking at some conferences in Europe, virtually this spring, and I think Jack's what is it called? Jack's Enter or Jack's, one of those Jack's conferences is upcoming, and I don't remember even, honestly. I'm doing too many things, and sometimes things are just a blur. But there are. If you go to iddworkshop.com, you can see all the workshops that I'm doing. Is it okay if I talk about you for a minute?
Oh, sure, absolutely,
So
absolutely,
Adam's going to do his event modeling workshop, a 2-day workshop. I think in May, is it, or April?
Yeah. The filling out the details and catching up on that, but it should be listed soon, right?
Yeah, and we have some others that I just probably shouldn't announce yet, but you're going to be really happy to see this kind of training, because it's like things that you always wanted to learn about, but you either can't find a workshop for it, or the people who teach the workshops are really not good at teaching those workshops. And this person is just incredibly good at teaching the workshops. And I wish I could say her name right now, but just to be nice.
Oh, okay, I think I know who it is.
Who?
I'm not going to spoil it, though.
No, take a guess.
Julie Lerman.
No. Julie, that would be great too.
Yeah. Thinking of DDD and great instructors.
Wait, I'll tell you what. I won't tell you her name, but her initials are Susanna Kaiser.
Yes.
Right? And she's really good at teaching, well, probably everything that she teaches, but I know that she's really good at teaching this certain subject. And I'll just name her right now that she's in. And there are others, but again, those are a little ways off. So we got some really good stuff upcoming, whether you attend mine or someone else's.
No, that's great. So, okay, well, thank you so much. I know you have limited time, and we only had an hour this time, but I think it was really important to catch up and give the full story of who Vaughn is, what he's doing, and what he's been fighting for everyone to have a better time when they go to their day jobs and are working with a nice environment where everyone knows what they're doing and they're collaborating. And so I thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time. It's really nice to get all the background and just have, for once, have you speak more than others. And, we all can learn from you. And so it was my great pleasure to give you the time and space to talk about everything you wanted to. And I hope I covered all the subjects, but door is always open for more. And I hope to do that soon.
Thank you, Adam. And thanks for being so inviting and open. And it's great to finally get to meet you kind of personally, but we'll actually have beers someday, but
I believe we will.
Yeah, our paths seem to have crossed very near each other, but never actually in person. So I'm glad that finally happened and look forward to future collaboration. So
same on this side. I'm very grateful for everything you've done in the past, and I'm looking forward to everything you're doing now to come to fruition and all the plans you have for the future. So I hope people follow you and take a look at what you're doing at every step, because there's lots to learn and lots of awesome stuff to use and help your organization. Thank you again, Vaughn.
Okay.
It's a true pleasure again. Thank you.
Okay.